Hey, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Some of y'all that have been listening to the Bag Company will know that my wife bought me a new computer, and the soundboard refused to hook into it. So I could buy a new soundboard, or I could just eliminate the music from the show, or I could get a different voice recorder, which is what I wound up having to do because the voice recorder that came with the computer, well, it wasn't that good. If you're watching on YouTube, you will simply notice that there's no music because it sounded really bad no matter how I put the music on. So if all you're listening to is the audio, you'll hear the music at the beginning and the end. If you're listening or watching on YouTube, no music. Tonight's show is being brought to you by the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you're not in Laredo or you just don't feel like driving over to their store, you can also get the best coffee at organicmancoffeetrike.shop. And now, here's the show. I did a show called Strange Sounds back in 2017. I talked about some of the sounds people have been hearing. Some said it sounded like a trumpet playing, while others said it sounded like heavy earth moving equipment being drug across a cement street. The boys in the white lab coats came out and called these sounds skyquakes. An earthquake is caused by tectonic plates rubbing together. Skyquakes are caused by, I don't know, clouds rubbing together, maybe, or something weird like that. I've heard a few explanations here lately which made me sit up and take notice. To share this with y'all, I decided to do another show on strange sounds, only this one is also about portals. The people looking to answer these questions only looked a few years back. They said the sounds had only been around since 2008. Strange booming sounds have been mentioned as far back as the 1800s. In India and Bangladesh, there's something called the Barisal guns, which have been heard for centuries. At first, the people living in Bangladesh along the Ganges River reported hearing what sounded like cannon fire. They referred to it as the Barisal guns, thinking that ghosts or spirits were firing huge cannons somewhere in the distance. When Britain moved in and forced all the other Europeans out of India and Bangladesh, the British soldiers had to come to terms with these weird sounds. Any cannon fire heard on the horizon would draw an investigation. The troops would want to know who was firing these huge guns. Patrols were sent out to find the culprits, but try as they might, they could never track them down. The source of the sound was always just over the horizon. The soldiers would report back to their officers that the source of the gunfire couldn't be found. What some folks are calling skyquakes got much more media attention around 2008. Some said the sounds they heard went on for a few minutes, while others said it lasted for hours. I had my own experience with weird sounds on December 11th, 2015. I was sitting at home watching TV at about 8:30 p.m. I heard what I thought was thunder rumbling outside and to the west of town. That would have been in Mexico. Rain in Laredo is something to treasure. It doesn't rain here very often. So I went outside to see if it was going to rain or not. The sky was clear. I could see the stars in the sky. There were no clouds and there was no reason to be hearing the thunder. I was about to go back to my show when I heard the sound more like cannon fire, and it sounded like it was coming out of Mexico to my west. I went through basic and advanced training at Fort Knox, and we used to listen to the sound of field artillery being fired, 105 and 150 millimeter cannons that would be firing all night long. And We could hear them in our barracks. This went on for many a night, so I'm familiar with what a cannon sounds like. As I stood there wondering what was making the sound, maybe thinking Nuevo Laredo was having a gun battle or something, it moved from my west to my southwest. Now it was sounded like it was right over downtown Laredo. I stood there listening, and it moved some more. It started rolling to the east. Now I could kind of judge where it was, turning my head. Eventually, it stopped when it was out over Lake Casablanca to my east. It stayed there for maybe a minute or two, and then it's faded away. I asked my neighbors if they had heard anything. Some of them said yes, and most of them said no, they hadn't been out that night. As for the scientists, they will try to explain things away using very weird things. How about atmospheric layers rubbing together that were making the sound? Winds coming from two different directions. I didn't know wind could make a rumbling sound like cannon fire, but that's what the scientists were trying. Kind of like throwing a whole bunch of ideas at the wall, see what got stuck. I was surprised the so called smart folks would say such a thing. I was even more surprised when people actually believed them. A few scientists tried to say the sound was coming from below and it was bouncing off of the atmosphere. And that's why people were hearing it. The tectonic plates were rubbing together, but instead of causing an earthquake, they were making sound that was bouncing off of clouds or atmospheric layers, and that's what people were hearing. It definitely sounded better than clouds rubbing together, but still, shouldn't there be an earthquake if the tectonic plates were moving? Experts said the sound was simply caused by trains being shunted back and forth, or there were some earth moving equipment out moving earth around. In the middle of the night, usually most construction stops at sundown. It's hard to see. The Air Force, they were mostly quiet, which surprised me. They didn't come out and say that it was just a weather balloon or something like that. This did get me to consider the possibility that the sound could have been caused by some secret aircraft being flown around the country. There's no telling what kind of secret projects are coming out of Area 51 and Dulce. A cloaked airplane flying overhead might have caused some of these sounds, but not all over the world. I don't think our government would be flying some secret invisible plane over Russia or China, because if the Russians or the Chinese shot the thing down or it were to crash by accident, well, all of a sudden everybody on the planet would now have a set of blueprints for their secret airplane. So now that just didn't hang well. The next possibility was a false flag operation. The law of the sea, also known as the Mar Liberum, says you can fly any flag you wish right up until hostilities are commenced. Before any shots can be fired, you have to show your true colors. There is actually such a law. This only applies if you're taking hostile action at sea. On land, a false flag operation is when the government performs some nasty activity and then blames it on someone else. Operation Northwoods was a series of false flag proposals that originated within the United States, certain secretive government agencies, back in 1962. President Kennedy said, no, we're not going to do that. He realized that not only were these operations illegal, but they were immoral as well. The proposal had called for the CIA and their operatives to attack U.S. cities and bases, probably killing a few dozen or hundred people, and then they were going to blame it on Cuba. So that way the U.S. could justify invading that country. Well, Kennedy said no. A new false flag that many believe our government, or maybe the elites who want to control our government, will create a scenario that looks as if aliens from outer space are invading the Earth. As a lead up to a false flag operation, the secret government, the power behind the folks you see on TV, begins stirring things up by making what appears to be alien activity all over the planet, kind of like coming attractions at the theater. You get people to thinking and talking about an upcoming invasion, so when the holograms start up, people are more likely to believe it. Once a lot of people are all primed to jump when told to, a hologram invading flying saucer appears in the sky. It might be just one location or even everywhere all at once. The citizens would all throw every cent they had to whichever government agency said they were going to handle this situation. President Reagan said this would bring the people of the world together. I think it would, only we'd all be on our knees. The possibility of the sounds being the beginning of a false flag invasion still has to be considered. The folks doing this dastardly deed wouldn't have to use invisible aircraft. One way of getting these sounds into an empty sky would be to use HARP. The High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program was experimenting by bouncing high frequency radio signals off the ionosphere. This was supposed to allow the military to communicate with ships and subs on the other side of the planet. HARP was first fired up in 1990. We already had communication satellites that could reach every part of the planet. Why do it with a giant antenna? Just in case those Ruskies managed to knock out our satellites, we needed a backup. I found 16 HARP installations around the world. Those are just the ones that are connected to the facility in Alaska. Russia has several HARP like installations all over the place, as well as China. Our government says these are all just studying the weather of the planet. Why do they keep blaming everything on weather related things like weather balloons? If all these installations are just studying weather, how on earth do tornadoes and thunderstorms catch people by surprise? All that tech should catch any change in the weather if that's what they're really doing. The scary thing I found while researching this show, a lot of the sites I used to look at are no longer there, or they're buried so far down the search page that it takes forever to find them. Most of the websites say that all the conspiracy theories are just a bunch of bunk. Nothing to see here. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I guess the Ministry of Truth has taken over the internet. Just a side note, one of the things HARP was supposed to do was heat up the ionosphere to help with the communications. You'd think the folks screaming about global warming would look at this as a possible cause and not all of our vehicles. The folks at NASA, never a straight answer, have discovered portals. They say these are nothing like what you think of as Operation Stargate or anything like that. Our tax dollars have been going to researchers at the University of Iowa who have been looking for and have found portals that could possibly lead to another dimension. They call these new discoveries X points. These points are where the magnetic field of the Earth connect to the magnetic field of the Sun. Observations by NASA's Themis spacecraft and Europe's cluster probes suggest that these magnetic portals open and close dozens of times each day. They're typically located tens of thousands of miles from Earth, where the geomagnetic fields meet the onrushing solar winds. Most portals are small and short lived, but others are huge and they stay open for a long time. Tons of energetic particles can flow through the opening, heating the Earth's upper atmosphere, sparking geomagnetic storms, and igniting bright polar auroras. I've seen the aurora borealis one time, way back when me and my brother were camping up near the northern border of Wisconsin. We were right next to Canada, and you could see the northern lights. It was something to see. If you've never seen them, you need to go to the northern border and have a look. If you have seen them, maybe go again. I'd like to see them again. It was quite a spectacular light show, like a Pink Floyd concert without the music. NASA has an ongoing mission called the Magnetospheric Multiscale Mission, which was launched in 2014 to study the phenomenon. They call it the MMS. I don't know where they got the S from. I guess the two S's in mission. The MMS is investigating how the sun's and the Earth's magnetic fields connect and disconnect, explosively transferring energy from one to the other in a process that is important to the sun, other planets, and everywhere in the universe all at once. At least that's what the never a straight answer folks are telling us. If all they're looking at is a magnetic field, why did they call them portals? A portal is a doorway or a gate or an other kind of an entrance, especially a very large and imposing opening. Portals form via the process of magnetic reconnection. Mingling lines of magnetic force from the sun and the earth crisscross and they join to create these openings. One theory I've heard is when a portal opens or closes, it creates a shock wave. And this is what's causing the booming or the trumpeting sound that people are hearing. As the portal opens, things could come or go depending on where the opening is connected to. George Knapp told about an incident on Skinwalker Ranch back when NIDS was still there. A portal opened and a huge creature stepped through. It kind of resembled a Bigfoot. The creature walked away and the portal closed. I don't remember if he said anything about there being a booming sound. I read the book quite a few years ago. A few folks in white lab coats say that black holes are a form of portal. Two black holes are connected by a wormhole that just might allow spacecraft to bypass vast distances between celestial bodies by bridging two separate points in space. In theory, this could allow the spacecraft to cover vast distances in a much shorter time period, allowing for time travel, even. Warp factor 6, if you will. Others say a wormhole connects several dimensions, ours and someone or something else's. Einstein theorized black holes existed, but it wasn't until 1964 that scientists actually found one. They are far away and hard to find. Scientists want to look into things no matter how dangerous they might be. A black hole is not something you want to go mucking about with, especially if you're not really sure what you're doing. The event horizon is the point at which the gravitation of a black hole latches onto you and sucks you in. You're supposed to be going from 0 to 1 million miles an hour very quickly. As the first half of your body crosses the line, it's going to accelerate. The back half of your body is still outside of the event horizon, so it's still not going nearly as fast as the front half. This would cause your body to tear in half, ending your space adventure at the same time it began. That's the theory since we don't have the technology to fly up there and actually have a look. Or do we? The Large Hadron Collider, the LHC, at the European Organization for Nuclear Research, CERN, in Geneva, Switzerland, opened in 2008. Remember that date? All those booming sounds people were reporting? with the first beam circulating on September 10th of that year. The goal of any collider is to accelerate particles to incredible speeds and then smash them together and then detect the resulting elements from that collision. What scientists hope to find by doing so are new particles or reactions, new information on how the universe works at a fundamental level. The first true collision happened in 2010 when the LHC first began operation. It reached a combined energy level of 7 teraelectrovolts. I have no idea how big that is, but I imagine it's a lot bigger than a 110 outlet in my house. It's been upgraded over the years, and now it's at 13 tera electron volts. Still a lot of energy. The Higgs boson is the fundamental force carrying particles of the Higgs field, which is responsible for granting other particles their mass. This field was first proposed in the mid 60s by Peter Higgs, for whom the particle is named, and his colleague. Scientists have nicknamed this thing the God particle. Something to keep in mind: the God you and I believe in is not the only God that people believe in. I've known a very diverse collection of people over the years. I've known a few witches. I knew a warlock at one time. Lots of Christians who weren't very Christ like. Buddhists, Hindus. All of these folks have different ideas on what God is like. Scientists tend to not believe in God, or at least that's what they say. They worship at the altar of science, and all the rest of us are just confused. They say they don't believe in a supreme being, or maybe the God they're worshiping isn't the same one the rest of us are. Jack Parsons was a scientist with a very different kind of God. I'll get to him in a few minutes. July 4th, 2012, the ATLAS and CMS experiments at CERN's Large Hadron Collider announced they had each observed a new particle in the mass region around 124 gigavolts, I believe. The particle was consistent with the Higgs boson, and in 2013, Francis Elbert and Peter Higgs received the Nobel Prize in Physics for the discovery. In 2015, there was a report of a vortex forming over Geneva, what some referred to as a UFO gateway. In the footage on the internet, clouds are seen swirling down into a point, as if there were a black hole, and a number of small bright orbs could be seen entering it. After a few seconds, the vortex vanishes. The UFO portal had erupted directly over the Large Hadron Collider. The naysayers claim this was all just CGI. In June 2016, a series of photos of the skies over CERN appeared online. The images had been captured 10 days after the AWAKE experiment, or Advanced Wake Field experiment, began at its facility at CERN on June 16, 2016. Some folks said the LHC had generated a portal above Geneva. The images showed towering black clouds filled with lightning. Another portal appeared over Geneva on June 5th, 2016, this one in the form of a cloud that was shaped like a giant ring. The cloud portal coincided with the emergency shutdown of the LHC, which happened after a weasel hopped over a fence, bumped into a transformer, and knocked out all the power. A multi-million-dollar machine was taken out by one weasel. August 2016, a video appeared online that showed a sacrifice being performed at the CERN grounds, right in front of that statue of Shiva, the Hindu deity. In the video, you see a number of cloaked figures gathered near the statue surrounding a woman, and then they do nasty things to her. CERN launched an investigation and they came out saying this was all just a prank being performed by a bunch of childish scientists with nothing to do with their time. We all know how humorous a bunch of scientists can be. No names were ever mentioned. No woman was ever found who was playing the part of the sacrificial victim. Oddly enough, the man who videotaped them doing this vanished without a trace. Why on earth is there a statue to Shiva on the grounds to begin with? The scientists who all dispel the idea of a higher power or a supreme being erected a statue to a Hindu god who represents goodness, benevolence, and protection, as well as destruction and creation of things. There are about 5,000 Hindus living in Switzerland. That's less than 0.6% of the population. Catholicism is the largest denomination in Switzerland. So why not put up a statue to their god? Who are the folks at CERN really serving? As particles go spinning around the accelerator and collide, they have formed miniature black holes. The same black holes theorized to connect one dimension to another. Yes, these are tiny little things, and they only last for less than a second. The first cannon were handheld, and they fired tiny projectiles made out of stone, about like a slingshot. The U.S. Army is working on a new long range cannon. It says can strike targets at up to 1,150 miles away. The Strategic Long Range Cannon, the SLRC, promises the ability to fire 50 times farther than any existing gun today. From Wilbur and Orville Wright in their first flight in 1903 to the SR 71 Blackbird was 73 years. How long will it take for the boys in the white lab coats to open and maintain a black hole long enough for something to crawl through? There's a story going around from November 2009 when an Iberwald Airbus vanished while en route to Bolivia. The plane was in the air passing over or near the LHC when it vanished. It reappeared at the Tenerife North Airport in the Canary Islands. Some folks believe the LHC caused some kind of a wormhole to open as the plane was flying overhead. The plane and its passengers were transported 5,500 miles in just a few seconds. John Teeter, the time traveler who was on with Art Bell on Coast to Coast AM back when it was the best radio show going, said the breakthrough that will allow for this technology will occur within a year or so when CERN brings their large facility online. He said that January 31st, 2001. The scientists at CERN are hoping that the Large Hadron Collider will soon make contact with a parallel universe. They are hoping to actually open a door to another reality. The laboratory known as CERN was born in 1952, not long after World War II. Since that time, some of the research at CERN has entered the public lexicon and become household words. This European facility began as a post war physics project and it blossomed into an international cabal, searching for nothing less than God. It helps not one bit that their image, if you look up CERN on the internet, CERN's image, I guess you'd call it. If you look at it, it has some numbers in it. It has a 6. It has two sixes. Well, actually, it has three sixes in a row. CERN is a French acronym based on the name of the working committee that imagined the possibilities for physics laboratory governed by the common market. This revived Roman Empire known as the European Union. The name of the committee was, and I still don't speak French, so I'm going to give it a shot. And the people living in France listening to me are all going to laugh, but it was the Conseil Européen pour la Recherche Nucléaire. There, I just butchered the French language, better known as CERN, the European Council for Nuclear Research. 2 years later, the working committee was disbanded, and the formal organization commenced work. The official name was changed to Organisation Européenne pour la Recherche Nucléaire, the OERN, or European Organization for Nuclear Research. It's funny, my family on my father's side came from France, or correction, yeah, the family on my mother's side came from France, but nobody in our family speaks French. When the official name changed, the acronym should have been changed as well. Werner Karl Heisenberg, a German physicist, is often called the founder of quantum mechanics. He served as the head of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute during World War II, heading up the Nazi push to create an atomic weapon. Some people claim that he drug his feet in developing a Nazi A bomb, thus allowing the Allies to win. In my show, The Nazi A Bomb from 2021, I give some of the evidence that the Nazis had an atomic bomb, but they only had enough fissionable material to make a few devices. They used one on the Russian army. The other one they may have turned over to the US. One of Heisenberg's colleagues said that Heisenberg had insisted the original acronym CERN remain in effect instead of going with the ORN. Werner Heisenberg understood what quantum physics implied for humanity. There's something known as the Babylon potential. This is a secret knowledge driven by spiritual advisors who say the Bible holds the key to opening a gateway for the gods, plural. This could also be called a doorway to hell. Why keep the name CERN? CERN is an abbreviated title for the ancient god Cernunnos, who was worshipped by the Celts. The name means horned one. His worshippers celebrated Cernunnos' birthday in December during the winter solstice. As the Celtic god of the underworld, he was about the same as Hades and Pluto. The Shiva statue depicted in the Hindu god in his Nataraja position, a cosmic dance that destroys the old universe in favor of a new creation. This ritual is performed on the back of a demon named Apasmara, who is said to represent ignorance. In bringing in a new world, well, is that a bad thing? It is if most of us are still trying to live on the old one. Since we are busy living our lives on this old world, and the folks who think they know better are trying to bring about a new or a different one, wouldn't it be kind of nice if they were to tell the rest of us what they were doing? Oh, by the way, we're going to destroy the world so a new one can be formed. If they really want to live somewhere else, fine. Open a portal, jump through, and on the way in, close it. We can get along just fine without all these black holes and time warp creations and world destruction that these people seem to be planning. Another white lab coated aficionado was Jack Parsons, the guy I mentioned a little while ago. He created Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is a part of NASA. They worked with rockets, but they didn't want to be connected with Buck Rogers, and so they said it was jets that they were working with. Yeah, they worked with rockets. Come on. It's rocket propulsion laboratories, but well, Jack Parsons wanted to do something known as the Babylon working. Aleister Crowley tried to stop him, saying that he wasn't ready for such a magic ritual. Crowley had founded the religion of Thelma, identifying himself as the prophet entrusted with guiding humanity into the aeon of Horus in the early 20th century. Crowley was a prolific writer. He published widely through his entire life. You can read his books if you want to. I'll pass. One of Parsons' many followers was a guy named Ron Hubbard. Together, these two decided that they were going to go ahead with the ritual. The Babylon working was a series of magic ceremonies or rituals performed from January to March 1946. This ritual was essentially designed to manifest an individual incarnation of the divine feminine called Babylon. The project was based on the ideas of Aleister Crowley and his description of a similar project of his from 1917. In the book of Revelations, Babylon is portrayed as having her forehead marked with the words, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abomination of the earth. Doesn't sound like the kind of person I want living next door. The two men, along with a host of followers, performed the ceremonies culminating in March. At the conclusion of the rituals, Parsons met a young woman who had gotten into his home. He became convinced that she was Babylon. It was actually Marjorie Cameron, but who was Marjorie Cameron and how did she get into his house without his knowing it? Well, Parsons decided that she was Babylon and they were going to start the next part of the project, which was to have a child. Well, as far as we know, they were never successful. Parsons and Cameron did get married. He called her the Scarlet Woman. They got married. A bunch of really strange things happened. Some money was stolen, and somebody ran off with Parsons' wife, and then Parsons managed to blow himself up. Some have drawn a connection between Parsons, Hubbard, the Babylon working, and UFOs. Parsons may have successfully ushered in Babylon, though she wasn't a goddess. She may have been a gray, an extraterrestrial. The first reported encounter with the Greys was in 1947 at Roswell, a year after the Babylon working. Prior to Hubbard and Parsons' rituals, Crowley had illustrated several of his books with drawings of what looked like grays. He said he had seen these in his visions. On a 1946 trip to New Mexico, Parsons may have contacted an extraterrestrial from Venus. I thought that just maybe this might have been Valiant Thor, since he was said to be from Venus, but he didn't arrive on the scene until March of 1957 in Alexandria, Virginia. Thor looked just like any human. Then again, maybe he'd been here before and just never mentioned it. Maybe back in 1946. Not everybody trying to bring about the New World Order wore a white lab coat. There were some who wore all black. Howard Stanton LaVey was born April 11th, 1930, in Chicago, Illinois. In his youth, Anton, Anton, in his youth, Howard played piano in the Baptist church. He grew up and became a carny worker who moved all over the country, setting up in empty fields, entertaining people for a week or two, and then tearing down and moving to a new location. In order to avoid the Korean War, he studied criminology at the City College in San Francisco. Howard was able to get a job as a photographer for the San Francisco Police Department, where he worked for about 3 years. He also tried to pursue a career as a psychic, but that didn't pan out for him. Howard became a local celebrity in San Francisco by his paranormal research, and he also did live performances. He played the organ at the Lost Weekend Cocktail Lounge. He formed a group called the Order of the Trapezoid. At some point in his life, he changed his name to Anton Zandor LaVey. LaVey began presenting Friday night lectures on the occult and performing rituals. A member of his inner circle suggested that what he had looked like a new religion. So, LaVey decided that on Walpurgis night, April 30th, 1966, he shaved his head in a tradition of the ancient executioners, declared the foundation of the Church of Satan, and proclaimed 1966 as Year One, Anno Satanas, the first year of the age of Satan. Walpurgis Night is a traditional holiday celebrated on April 30th in Northern Europe and Scandinavia. It's a 6 month time period from Halloween, exactly 6 months. In Sweden, typical holiday activities include the singing of traditional songs, lighting of bonfires. In Germany, the holiday is celebrated by dressing up and pulling pranks on other people. They also make loud noises to try to keep evil spirits away. Many people hang blessed sprigs of foliage from their houses and their barns in order to ward off evil spirits. They leave out pieces of bread with butter and honey they call Enkenschnitt, which are offerings for phantom dogs. In Finland, Walpurgis Night and May Day are pretty much merged into a single celebration that is usually referred to as Vappu, and that is among the country's most important holidays. Initially, Walpurgis Night was celebrated by the Finnish upper class, and then in the 19th century, the students took over the celebration. Merrymaking begins on the evening of April 30th with a lot of alcohol being drank. The carnival like festivities carry on the next day, along with a lot of hangovers. Something else to keep in mind, Adolf Hitler was supposed to have committed suicide on April 30th, Walpurgis Night. The origins of the holiday date back to a pagan celebration of fertility rites and the coming of spring. After the Norse were Christianized, the pagan celebration became combined with the legend of Saint Walburga, an English born nun who lived in Heidenheim Monastery in Germany and later became the abbess there. Walburga was believed to have cured the illnesses of many local residents. She is traditionally associated with May 1st because of the medieval account of her being canonized upon the transition of her remains from their place of burial to the church around 870. LaVey's appearance on television and other media coverage attracted a lot of converts. There was never more than a few thousand at any one time, but how many followers do you really need? Reports of the colorful rituals that were being held at LaVey's San Francisco home, which he had painted all black, kept his church in the news. A lot of celebrities were drawn to his group. People like Jane Mansfield and Sammy Davis Jr. LaVey set down the teachings and the rituals of the church in the Satanic Bible. The church didn't worship Satan as a Christian embodiment of evil or even as an existing being. Instead, LaVey taught that his infernal majesty, as he called him, was a symbol of humanistic values such as self assertion, rebellion against unjust authority, vital existence, uh, and undefiled wisdom. Rituals were designed as psychodrama to encourage members to develop their egos and to leave behind their lives as submissive, willing weaklings. Included in the rituals was a black mass that was performed on a naked female body. She was used as their altar. During the early years of the church, LaVey authorized the formation of local chapters, which he called grottos, across the U.S. In the 70s, a number of schisms occurred, including the defection of one of his key members, Michael Aquino. He founded a rival temple called the Temple of Set. Michael Aquino was a U.S. Army officer. He was a graduate of the University of California with a PhD. 1968, he was in the Army as a specialist in psychological warfare. Now, I've known a few PSYOPs guys, and they were all very odd people. The next year, he joined the Church of Satan. His career in the church was put on hold while he served a tour of duty in Vietnam. But shortly after his return to the U.S., 1971, he was ordained as a satanic priest. Aquino bumped heads with LaVey on how the church should be run. In response to the strange ideas from Aquino, LaVey disbanded all of the grottos. Aquino had been sent to Kentucky in the military, and he became the priest of the Church of Satan, where him and his church would meet at his home. Aquino soon became disenchanted with the church under LaVey's leadership. 1972, he and his wife Lilith uh, split from LaVey. The idea was that LaVey had said that Satan wasn't an actual being. The devil was simply our inner character getting out. On the other hand, Aquino believed that Satan was an actual, honest to God, real creature whom he had met. Aquino referred to Satan as Set, which was an ancient Egyptian god who evolved into the Judeo Christian figure of Satan. Set was said to have appeared to Aquino and given him a document called the Book of Coming Forth by Night, which was the foundation of his new temple. The devil, also referred to as Satan, is best known as the personification of evil and the nemesis of good people everywhere. His image and story have evolved over the years, and the devil has been called by different names. Various cultures, including Beelzebub, Lucifer, Satan, Baphomet, and Mephistopheles, with various physical descriptions, including horns and cloven hooves instead of feet. This may have been used in the early days as a form of a snub against pagans who believed in Pan, who was a half man, half goat. Pan was always depicted as having horns and hooves as well. Satan is also known as the father of lies. His greatest accomplishment is said to be convincing most folks that he doesn't exist. I am amazed at how many people who call themselves Christians and say they believe in what the Bible says, but they will also say that the devil is just a creation by the writers to make being good even better. They say they believe in God, but not his opposite member. Yin and yang, light and darkness, warm and cold, good and bad. God, yes, but Satan, no. Of all the people I've met over the years, I can't say that I've ever actually met a Satanist. At least I don't know that I've ever met one. If I have or not, because they usually don't, advertise the fact. The devil was said to once be a beautiful angel named Lucifer who defied God and fell from grace. He was probably a teenager at the time. This assumption that he is a fallen angel is often based on the book of Isaiah in the Bible, which says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning?" There are folks out there who believe Satan or Lucifer is like Prometheus. In Greek mythology, Prometheus is one of the Titans. He is best known for defying the gods by stealing fire and giving it to the humans in the form of technology, knowledge, and general civilization. Prometheus wanted only the best for man, so he helped us advance. A God has said, well, Lucifer said about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, God has said, "You must not eat of it or touch it, or you will die." "You will not surely die," the serpent told her, "for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Some people have interpreted this as saying that Lucifer was only trying to help advance mankind. This has led to some people thinking of becoming a Satanist is a good thing. He's the underdog, that kind of thing. This brings to mind that song by the Rolling Stones, Sympathy for the Devil. You could say it's just a song, a kind of a way to bring attention to the band. I kind of liked it. I had a copy of it. Maybe it's something more. Lucifer Rising is a short film by director Kenneth Anger. Kenneth Anger was born Kenneth Wilbur Engelmeyer on February 3rd, 1927. He's an American underground experimental filmmaker, actor, and author. He works exclusively in short films. He has produced about 40 works since 1937, 9 of which have been grouped together as the Magic Lantern Cycle. Although virtually completed in 1972, Lucifer Rising was only distributed in 1980 after Bobby Beausoleil delivered the finished soundtrack. Robert Kenneth Beausoleil, born November 6, 1947, is an American murderer and associate of Charles Manson. He was a member of the Manson family. He was convicted and sentenced to death for the July 27th, 1969 fatal stabbing of Gary Hinman, who had befriended him and other Manson associates. Beausoleil was later granted commutation to a lesser sentence of life imprisonment after the Supreme Court of California issued a ruling that invalidated all death sentences issued in California prior to 1972. Now, hasn't that worked out well? Fascinated by fame, especially its darker aspects, from an early age, Anger had long been a fringe figure in Hollywood, making and independently distributing obscure occult inspired works that eventually attracted the Rolling Stones. Anger was attracted to the power and the pop culture shamanistic potency welded by rock stars, and none more so than Mick Jagger, who back then was viewed by parents and a lot of the folks in Washington as being a drug addled threat to society. Anger reasoned that Jagger performed the part of Lucifer in the movie. However, in the end, Jagger chickened out. Another prospect that Anger considered for the part was a little known hippie songwriter named Charles Manson. When that didn't work out, Anger began searching for some other young man to play the part. 1966, a young musician named Bobby Beausoleil had moved in with Anger, and he was being prepared to play the part. The character of Lucifer was to be the hero. He just wanted what was best for mankind. God didn't want people to be smart. The whole movie would convince someone who didn't look too closely that the devil was the good guy. The father of lies, that dude. Have you ever wondered why so many of the bad guys in most movies look so cool, while the hero is usually a bit bland? Maybe the folks in Hollywood are setting folks up to accept something nasty once it crawls through their portal. Could the Barisal guns in India have been the opening and closing of portals? India has a long history of magic and some bizarre technological machinery. The idea of a sonic boom being created as the air is torn open, well, that fits in well. As for the scraping sound, could it just possibly be the air rushing into the hole whenever the opening is made between two dimensions? Or could it be something coming through the portal. All I can say is we don't really know what is making some of those sounds up there in the sky. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, spread it around. Tell people what they're missing. Tell people to listen up. Share the show. Like Tony Merkel says, share the show. I don't care how you do it. Just share it. Let people hear what they're missing. If you didn't enjoy the show, why are you still listening? You should have hit the off button some time ago. If you really don't like the show, be sure and push down on that dislike button twice. That makes it twice as potent. If you'd like to get a t-shirt, not the one I'm wearing, a Strange Things t-shirt, you can find them at tpublic.com. If you'd like to buy one of my books, you can find them at amazon.com. Or if you're in Laredo, you can get them at the Organic Man Coffee Trike. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things. And like I said, if you're watching on YouTube, there's not going to be any exit music. And if you're listening on Podomatic, uh, on any of the audio platforms, hopefully there will be some music at the end. And hopefully I won't screw up the recording when I add it. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.